Angela Boyce Claire.
Chloe Diehouse. Hi. Katie Gabriel Black.
This is super fast, are you catching it all? I'm Melissa Campbell Kelsey.
Hi, Erin Errol.
Awesome. So today, well, let me just do the roll call. Hold on 1 second. Just say your name. When here, Dave Alvin. Dave Williams.
Here.
Sherry Gagnon. Here. Jen Lima. Here. Angela Boyce Claire. Here. Chloe Diehouse. Here. Katie Gabriel Black. Here. Melissa Kim McKelsey. Here. Erin Earl. Here. Chevalier Finkelstein. Emma Riel. Who am I missing?
Alexis Robach.
Alexis Robach. And I'm missing one. I'm sorry, I've got a wicked migraine and I'm having a really hard time concentrating.
It's okay, I noted who's here, so
Okay.
we're fine.
Okay. Did everybody get a chance to review the minutes from the last meeting? Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Can I get a second? Second. All in favor? Okay, awesome.
Do you want to abstain?
I don't know, I'm just really not sure what I'm supposed to do. So.
Yeah, no worries. So with minutes, technically you could vote on them, but often a lot of times if someone's not at a meeting, they'll abstain, and so that probably would be the vibe, so.
So any abstentions?
Abstain.
Okay.
Perfect. No worries, welcome to.
So really, the focus of today is gonna be to go over the audit and discuss, everybody's thoughts, questions, recommendations, and really just, kind of dive into it. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to read it at least once. So I'll just kind of put it out there, we'll just do like an open, if anybody has something that they wanna start with. I know some of you have come to the listening sessions that we've had and some haven't, and some have already shared, but does anybody wanna lead with anything?
Sure, I just wanted to get clarification on the errors, like what the extent of it was. I mean, I guess in general, I could see it ranging anything from like, it seems like a single copy and paste error that they came back and corrected, reasonable, no big deal, to there are multiple errors and it calls into question the entire report. And I just wanna know, like, what's the extent of it? Should people be concerned? Does it seem like a single one-off
So
mistake?
the error that was brought to our attention and that PCG confirmed was with the graduation rates. The data that was used in the initial copy of the report that we got, they used state level data instead of North Kingstown level data. And so we asked them to go back and do a thorough review, which they did, and we asked them to clarify some more in terms of footnotes and sources and things like that, but they did a review of all the data that was linked in there. And there was only one other error that was found, and that was in one of the other graduation rates tables. There was just one other statistic that was off, but everything else was correct. So no, I don't think the entire report is to be discounted because of that. They provided clarification on, where the sources came from, and like they linked where some links were missing. I guess RIDE had updated their website the day after they gave us their final report, which meant a lot of the links that they had linked to were broken because RIDE updated their website. But no, I think the integrity of the report is accurate except for those two things.
Thank you, that's helpful to clarify those details because I'm sure there are people out there who would call the whole thing into question, and so hearing that it was those two small
Yeah.
mistakes is really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we met with PCG, we asked them to go through, like, we asked them to go back through with their data analysts and double check every single one. And then like Jen said, the footnotes were really important because, even though some of them were implied, like, we wanted to make sure that people were able to like verify the data themselves if they wanted to, and so that's why they went back and did all the footnotes. Not that it was 100% needed because you could kind of figure it out, but like we wanted to be able to say, okay, this is where that data came from and this is how you get to that original source. So they were really good about doing that, and then we've also requested, although we're trying to figure out like timing wise, for them to come and talk through it with the community as well. So hopefully they'll be able to come to a future school committee meeting to be able to go through that and answer any questions the school committee has also.
Did they charge us to go back and fix their mistake?
Any other questions on that area?
Yeah, so I think, you know, as far as the what's next, like obviously you all were the ones that made the recommendation to the, school committee to do the audit, and so, kind of the function of the subcommittees is to give recommendations to the school committee, and so of course the school committee members, which Jen and I are the two that come to these meetings with you all, like, and we can communicate stuff back to the larger group as far as kind of how to move forward, and so what I'd be curious to know is like things that maybe stood out to you all, or things that, you know, maybe didn't surprise you, but you know, that are in here, cause there's a lot of recommendations, and I think that's gonna be kind of the interesting thing is where do we go next, and what, you know, what order do kind of things get tackled, and so if anyone has kind of just anecdotal thoughts, you know, that's helpful, I think, for you all walking through it. We could also kind of go through the audit and kind of do section by section if that's helpful. I know 91 pages is a lot to digest and then comment on, and so whatever's most helpful for folks, we can definitely do. Cause I think, Jen and myself definitely wanna hear the subcommittee's thoughts, and also kind of what you all, you know, are thinking as far as what the subcommittee would want for next steps. And then also after we kind of go through and hear you all, we'll talk a little bit about the listening sessions with the community.
There was also the summary of key findings that, we put out on the website that kind of tried to like encapsulate 91 pages into, you know, 8 bullet points, you know, and so I don't know if we wanna start there. It kind of highlighted the major strengths, major weaknesses, and maybe like the top, 4 or 5, what PCG identified as, key priorities and next steps. That doesn't mean that those are the ones that, you know, we need to decide are the next steps, but they were ones that stood out from the report.
I had something I was gonna, unfortunately, I'm really sorry, I don't have it in front of me right now. I've been on my Chromebook all day and it died right before I was gonna read my notes, I'm really sorry. However, I did have something, and I think I said this in the listening session that I attended that really stood out to me. I found a lot of parts of the audit report.
You can use that one, I'll pull it up.
To be like very illuminating for me, in a way that I wasn't expecting. Like, I really, like, I think there were parts of me that were like, there's no way this is gonna tell me a lot of things that I don't already sort of know, but it really did. One thing that really stood out to me, I'm not gonna try to find it in here right now, and
What's the topic?
was about, the statistics from the, surveys that they did. I mentioned this in, of the community, and it said that a very significant percentage of the respondents, the student respondents, identified as, non-binary or not, you know, male or female, and that was really surprising to me. I wasn't expecting the number to be so high. I think it might have been like, I'm not gonna try to guess.
I think it was like 10%.
10%, yeah. And it was like, wow, this clearly, this data shows us that this population of the students is more significant than I think most of us thought, and I think really can help advance a lot of the challenges that non-binary students are facing right now in the school department, like lack of gender-neutral bathroom options, lack of gender-neutral training rooms, when we look at these statistics and see how significant that population is. So that was something that really surprised me and made me happy, because I feel like that data is really gonna help us as a subcommittee to do our work, if that makes any sense.
No, it does.
Thank you so much. I don't know who passed this to.
Oh, is that, you can keep that one. It's okay.
I have a bunch of thoughts that are not necessarily related, but one of my groups of thoughts is that I disagree with PCG's, some of their recommendations. One of their recommendations is about requiring participation in certain types of training. I think that can backfire. There's literature that supports, the research that supports that. And so if there's to be any sort of training at all, which it seems like this community wants, teachers want it, and I'm in favor of, I don't think it should be a mandatory kind of thing. I don't think that's the kind of attitude we want going into this. It should be like a incentive. PCG talked a bit about requiring admin and teachers to participate in some sort of implicit bias professional development course. They specifically called out the Harvard implicit bias test as like the backbone, and I do not think that should be used to look at individuals' positions when it comes to bias. That is a test that needs to be run, like, an individual needs to take that test like dozens of times to get an average score. It's not like a one-off kind of test, and I think it's unprofessional of them to recommend it as requiring admin and teachers to participate in something like that. That's all.
Other thoughts?
I guess just thinking broadly, so I know, Jen, you talked about how you all, sort of summarize things, and to me it looks like, that chapter 4, starting on page 18, they give their priority recommendations, if I'm reading this right, and to me, like, we hired them and they did this report, and so I feel like, these issues notwithstanding, like, there may be things we disagree with, but I feel like, we should sort of take their, with maybe a few exceptions where their word as experts, since we hired them, and sort of think about what sorts of things do we wanna implement, and when I think about that, it's like, well, okay, well, how do we go about doing that? And it seems like there are some recommendations that are maybe more low-hanging fruit, and it can be low-hanging fruit in terms of ease of implementation, sort of how straightforward it is. Like, for example, implementing a late bus, and while that may be easy in terms of simplicity, it may not be easy in terms of cost and other factors, right? So you can think of low-hanging fruit in terms of cost, you can think of low-hanging fruit in terms of simplicity, and then you can think of things that are not low-hanging, in any stretch of the imagination, but may still be priorities, like among these priority recommendations. But nonetheless, it still makes sense to sort of dig into. Like, for example, the first one, set a clear vision and common language for equity across NKSD, and whereas that seems super important and something that we should start in on right away, it's probably not something that we're gonna finish in one meeting. And so I guess all of that is to say, I feel like maybe at the outset, having gotten the report, it makes sense to think about a plan of attack, on a big picture level. Like, how do we wanna go about thinking about how we're gonna implement these recommendations, how we're gonna choose which ones we wanna go for first, how we're gonna make those decisions, what are the criteria we're gonna use to make those decisions.
We talked at one of the listening sessions about like it being on like a scale of like cost, ease, what were the 4 corners, Erin, you had said it, like, and how some would be here and some would be here, and just trying to decide.
Yeah, it's definitely cost, you hit 2 of them for sure, cost and time, and then I think it's like ease of, like kind of how easy and how fast, and then how much, and kind of figuring out where different things fall in that.
Yeah.
I can't remember all 4, but yeah, we were definitely talking about that.
Yeah.
But I think what is important is that what you said about like the criteria for decisions, because obviously people will have different opinions on different things, kind of figuring out like, what is that criteria, and then also like what does the administration think, and what do the building leaders think, et cetera, because you wanna make sure that whatever is decided upon is actually like going to work within all the other things that are happening in schools and the district. And so I think that's an important piece too, is like it's easy to say, oh, this is XYZ, but like there's a lot of other pieces of the puzzle too, and so making sure it fits into that larger strategic, things that we're trying to move forward. So really good points.
And I guess just to add on that, one thought along those lines, I remember when our group first formed, the DEI Sub-Committee, and we talked about having sort of like a first thing that we could say, hey, we're on the way here, and I think what had to do with the group that was formed at the high school, and it seems like maybe that principle might apply here too. Is there something we can identify that maybe even coming out of this meeting, we can say like, hey, let's make this recommendation to the school committee. It seems like it hits those boxes, whatever they are, for like low cost, pretty simple, likely to get less pushback, might be nice.
It's actually nice to see that those groups were actually one of the bright spots in the report. Since you mentioned that was nice.
one of the student groups.
The affinity groups,
Mhm.
yeah.
I talked about it to Saga, they were very excited to hear that they were mentioned.
That's great.
What are others' thoughts? So I think those are all really good points about kind of the moving forward parts and the low hanging fruit, and also thinking about the criteria and definitely the quick wins. You know, not, because some of these things, like you said, will take a really long time to think about, work through, make sure that you have community buy-in, make sure that you have, you know, the schools are all on board. But I do think when you do a report like this, like showing some sort of progress is really helpful, because, you know, people put a lot of time and energy giving their stories to it, and you wanna make sure that they feel that on the other side, I think, or see some progress somewhere.
Has there been any work on the bullying policy at all? So this report said that the bullying policy was last amended in 2013. That was 10 years ago. There was a lot of discussion about bullying, discrimination, especially against students of color, LGBTQ students, generally marginalized groups. That could be a policy to, and that's a student safety thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do think that's one of the umbrella, that's being looked at under the umbrella policy.
Yeah, so two things. One, what we've learned is just because the policy says it hasn't been updated since that date doesn't mean it hasn't been looked at since that date. And so I think fairly recently they've started putting, like, you know, reviewed but no changes made. And so it's not, I was concerned when I was looking at some of those dates as well, and I was reassured by some past school committee members that that wasn't the case, and but it doesn't show like that. But then also to Jen's point, the district does have a Title IX consultant working on a lot of policies that kind of connect to that. And I do believe that that one is part of the one that the professional external person is looking at, but we most certainly can confirm. And then also at the last school committee meeting, we established a policy for the policy subcommittee, and so we're able to have that meeting now. And so the superintendent's looking at dates, and then we'll be able to bring ones forward. And so if it's not, that could be put on a list of things to look at. A great thought. Other thoughts?
At the risk of I mean, like, I don't wanna talk too much, but like, I can nominate what might be a low-hanging fruit. It might not be, though, I don't know, you might tell me that I'm crazy, but, they mentioned in the report the cost of school events being a barrier. I've often thought that myself, particularly at like JV soccer, like, it seems weird to have to pay for that. But having said that, I coach at the middle school level, and all my kids participate in school sports, in the school system. But I don't know, I know there's a booster club you can pay into. I don't know the cost structure. I don't know the cost structure for like uniforms and paying coaches, and I don't know if the payment for events is wrapped into that. There's also payment for, like, my kids participate in the band and orchestra and chorus, and that is the suggested donation, actually, so that's maybe a little bit different, because they do make clear that that's a suggested donation, I think, at all of those events. But I think the sports events are a strict payment, and it seems like if
For the
we-
high school sports?
Yeah, for the high school sports.
Yeah, so for the way it works for the high schools, you can buy a booster pass.
Right, yeah.
And it's a $45 level, gets you one season pass to every single,
Right.
90 gets you two. But other than that, it is a per admission based ticket, which is typically $5 for an adult or $2 or $3 for a student, I can't remember, for every game. So yeah, if you bring your family to a football game, it's gonna cost you, you know, you see families walk through the door, it's $20 easy for a family to
Yeah.
walk through for a Friday night football game.
At least at a minimum, it seems like, you know, we could make that a suggested donation. Like, I would guess that most people, well, I shouldn't say that, I have no idea.
The
I would
gate-
hope that a lot of people who can pay would pay.
The gate
you know.
fees, though, I think go to Rhode Island, like the gate fees
They're not coming back to the school.
Right.
But what I noted was, so cost of events being a barrier, right?
Yeah.
So what I noted from your point was, where do the fees go? And who's collecting them? So is it Rhode Island Interscholastic League, is it the Booster Club, is it something else? And then if it's something that the district doesn't control, then like, how do you counter that barrier? There's different ways to look at a barrier and remove a barrier for students to be able to participate in things. And so if it's not that you could just get rid of it, like, what are the other options potentially? So, you know, that's one that could maybe be something, and maybe it's a small thing, right? Like, the play's coming up, so is there opportunities there? Doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be district money, but maybe there's other opportunities to try to remove that barrier for students from donations or from, you know, different avenues. So I definitely hear you on that one, and that's something that could be looked into more.
Rogers High School does something where they get their students in for free to games, which I think is a great way to incentivize students to come and to make it cheaper for their families.
Yeah, so that seems one, and again, you never know, right? You start peeling back the
Yeah.
onion, and it turns out to be like the biggest, hardest thing ever. But you know, I think where you all with this where you start is like you start picking ones that might be possible, right? Or that you would like to see or could make a difference, even in a small way, for all students. And then you go from there. So it's a good suggestion, a good place to start. Are there other ones that people? Yeah.
I think that this isn't super concrete, but I like that we started somewhere and now it's generating more questions, right? And one of the things that kept popping up for me when I was looking through this was how many times we saw the fear of backlash from parents, or we even named it earlier in terms of the buy-in or making sure we get the buy-in. And so for me, it's also, while we're doing this, how might we either define or further define concepts, values, things like that, and so that we're not just doing, but we're also grounded in a reason that folks can get behind from the very beginning, and we don't have to backtrack about, well, here's why we do this. We're saying right off the bat, here's why, and now these are the resulting actions. So
What would that look like to you, Melissa?
I didn't say I had a
I know,
concrete
sorry. I was thinking you might.
Right,
It's okay.
But
I hear
that,
you.
okay, if we're going off this example, right, now we have the questions of, okay, are people just unclear about where the money goes? Then we need to make that more transparent, right? So I guess things like that, as we dig into some more concrete ideas, what other questions can we generate from there to make things just, so that we're not trying to hide anything, but like, I can easily find it if I go to the website, for example, you know?
Yeah. Chloe, did you have something?
Yeah, so I know I'm always mentioning this, and it was mentioned earlier, I don't remember who said it, but I'm always talking about this, and I will continue to until it's solved. We really, really, really need a late bus. I'm not, like, I know that it's challenging, what with getting what with the busing systems and all that stuff, but as a student at NKHS right now, I hear about it almost every day from, I must have heard about it from like 40 students. I mean, it's continually an issue, it's continually preventing students, and at a higher rate, the students, lower income students who don't have access to transportation after school like that, continually affecting them and preventing them from being able to access key programs that will help them get into college, help them succeed in high school, like can't go to ARC. It's really, really a problem, and I think, if I'm not wrong, is something that there might not be a lot of parental backlash to, because it's just busing. I mean, I don't wanna jinx anything, but it's just busing. I mean, it's not, I don't think, a super controversial issue, but it's a real issue that's affecting students right now, every day, and is challenging, but I mean, should definitely always be on the list, in my opinion. So, sorry.
I agree, and
I'm very
then
passionate.
If I can piggyback on what Chloe said, I absolutely couldn't agree more, that's on my number one, on my list. Because in looking at the statistics for all of the other things, the student achievement and the breakdown of test scores, the graduation rate and all of that, there are so many, opportunities offered after school that might help those students with extra, academic support, and they can't stay after school because they don't have a ride home. And so they don't have access to that, after school help. And we only have so many hours in a day, so that it's really hard for teachers to say, you know, when you have a class full of kids, you know how it is, you can't really work on one-on-one remediating with a student, when you have a class of students in front of you. So you say, stay after school, I'll stay after school with you. Many teachers are, more than willing to stay after school, offer extra help, as well as the, Academic Resource Center, program. And then in addition to that, all of the other activities and clubs that, take place, which also enhance their academics, as well as their social, and buy into the system. So that is the number one on mine. So if we could maybe put it forth to the school committee to put that in the budget, that would be my proposal. I would like to see late buses put in the budget for the high school and both middle schools, so that all three schools have, equitable access to getting a ride home after school.
I think that's great. I mean, we all know we put this forward last year, and the trial was set up deliberately, in my opinion, not to succeed. So I think they had said that it could be revisited if the need was demonstrated, and I think that it's clearly demonstrated from the results of this and from this. So I would second that for sure. Do you wanna make that motion official?
Yep.
I'll second it. Do you wanna take a vote? All in favor of recommending that? Erin, are you voting?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Can I just add to that too about the late bus? I feel like in order for that to work, whoever's in charge of running after-school activities has to sort of make it work for that late bus. So, you know, I know as an example with some sports teams, and I know sometimes at the high school it has to do with access to facilities and they have to be at different times of the day or it doesn't work. So I do understand that limitation, but I know sometimes it's and I may have been guilty of this as well as a coach, but running your practices later than you originally told parents, you know, for some people that's like no big deal. Oh, I gotta sit in the parking lot for half an hour. But for other people it's like, no, if you say it's gonna end at this time, it's gotta end this time. And then if we have a late bus, ideally it ends when the late bus is there. Otherwise, what's the point of the late bus? So if the people running the programs don't make it so that you can use the late bus, then the late bus is not gonna be helpful. And so I think value-wise, right, like that sort of fits into access, and it also fits into that first, on that whatever that recommendation, that chapter 7, is it, chapter 6, the priority recommendations, like sort of that culture of all staff and faculty sort of being aware of these equity and having that mindset, right? If I make this practice go longer, people will make the late bus, and then that disadvantages some people, you know.
That's a great point.
What are other thoughts? So we have one, it sounds like we have one official recommendation, and the way, just to clarify how it will happen, is on the school committee agenda, anytime there's a subcommittee meeting in between a school committee meeting, there's a report out section, and so Jen will be able to report out as the chair of the subcommittee, but also if there's any action then warranted by the school committee, that could also show up in a business item as well, depending on if the superintendent and the school committee, we kind of look at what we have that going on that week, what are time sensitive, et cetera, and so, Jen would put forward a request for that as well, depending on the action. So you'll always get at this is what happened to the subcommittee, and then if there's things that deem action, that would be how it would go on the agenda, just so you all know how it kind of works. And so if you have other ones, you're more than welcome to bring them forward. The point too that you made about the budget, it is definitely an important time for next year's fiscal budget. The administration's been working really, really hard to prepare next year's budget, and there's, it's going through the process of going to the town, et cetera, over the next couple of months. And so definitely if there's anything for next fiscal year, probably 3 weeks ago would have been the time, but there's still some opportunity as it hasn't come forward to the school committee yet. Others thoughts?
I was just gonna, I was having conversation as well, so just to back up the late buses, that even, I think people who might not have been to the listening and talking, that was takeaways of just folks in the community that I've talked to are like, wow, there's late buses, so that was just to put that out there. I think in, kind of to your point too about the kind of the backlash, and there was the comment or the findings about favoritism, and there were some kids that were included, more buddies. I think and to Dave's point, they're kind of built within all of this, and I think I think we're kind of along the same line. There needs to be some kind of mechanism of yeah, but every time my coach keeps where do you go with that? And you're the lone student to say that my coach keeps because there again is the disparity. Where is the mechanism that we're gonna build in for, I'm in this class and everyone's the buddy, I'm the person sitting over here, kind of not in the group. So, and I don't know how you create that, or, you know, if there's gonna be another type of committee, you know, I know one of the recommendations was having an assigned person, or if that came up, kind of talking about building something like that in there, because if we're doing all these things, where does the kid go whose coach keeps keeping them?
Right.
And is it to the principal, is it to the, you know, and then up on the kid, and they're gonna feel like the coach
There's the power differential,
is a
and
very
they're like,
power
yeah,
differential,
they
yeah.
can't, cause now I'm gonna get cut, or I'm gonna lose my playing time, or whatever, or I'm gonna get ostracized by the other kids,
Yeah,
whatever
in
the activity
group
might be.
or-
Yeah.
Right, and so, but, and it was kind of one of the things that kind of got brought up too.
So you need kind of like a neutral, if you will, go-to person for, like, anyone to go
Yeah.
to say, you know, this is a concern, or this is a,
However,
like, this is
I'm at
not
the
working for
hospital,
me,
we have
or-
corporate you know, like there's these like systems that is in place that anything that you feel just kinda goes there, and it's an anonymous kind of, you know, or if the person wants to, but how that gets built in so that all of these things get, the integrity remains, and the kids, or people, whoever the end user is, you know, that all this work is being held accountable in the right way.
That was in here for sure several times, of just a structure, some kind of reporting structure that
Mhm.
students know about.
Yeah.
And that the fear of backlash came out not only from parents, but from peers. If I report
Right.
this, I'd rather not be ostracized, so I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut kind of concept. And so, 100% that,
Yeah.
that it's, if it doesn't exist, that it needs to be created. And then again, that transparency, or the communicating that out, so folks just know that there is a process.
And I also think and this was in the report as well, there needs to be someone at a high level that exercises actual power within the school system that holds these values. Because absent that, it's just languishes. So, and they talked about a position, a full-time position, which may be pie in the sky, but then I think they also gave the secondary recommendation, could this be a piece of someone's job? And they, in the report, use this language about how the person has to have actual decision-making power. It can't be viewed as sort of symbolic, or and I think that sort of speaks to the sorts of things we're talking about. There has to be a go-to person that actually has power within the school system that holds these values as one of the priorities, and can say, well, if that's a problem, we need to make a change right now, like, you know, let's make it happen.
And who holds those values? You can't just assign it to Joe in such and such department and say, hey, it's yours now.
Right.
Because if Joe doesn't believe it, and doesn't support the initiatives, even if Joe has the power, they're not gonna happen.
So to me, even though that may be, that sort of may be a more complicated thing in terms of cost, I feel like that should be a priority, because if we have that person, then that person can also help to push forward some of the other things that are in the report. So I feel like the sooner we can, if it's possible to get that sort of person, or a piece of a person whose job that is, that would actually facilitate pushing all of this forward.
Can we put forth a recommendation to the school committee to put resources towards that? Like a, you know, a dedicated person
They
who's-
call it something in the report, I
Yeah, they
gotta
like
find it.
director, like a DEI or something. Yeah, and then they code, like I think they said, their recommendation was to sit on the committee and code.
Right.
Right. So you wanna put forth for like a person in charge of DEI? A person to spearhead.
They did have a job title.
Isn't it like page 27?
Yeah, I don't really care for the title, but
Director of-
someone-
I think they wrote director of
Diversity,
DEI.
Equity, and Inclusion. Director of DEI.
Yeah, there it is. Right. On page 22, is it?
You could call it something more like
21.
inclusion, you know, or some, you know, other.
Page 21, bottom of page 21, it starts to.
So like somebody to spearhead these initiatives.
Yeah, otherwise I think it's just gonna be like piecemeal and not a cohesive narrative about what needs to happen in the school year.
Does that role exist in any school district in Rhode Island?
Yes.
At least.
wants to, like, I don't wanna, I wanna be mindful of
Yeah.
my positional power too on the other side, so I think, you know, it's whatever you all think is best is what I would recommending, for lack of a better word, but what I am hearing from y'all is the concept of, and I'm not sure what happens right now, you know, as far as like, if somebody did have a challenge like that, like kind of where that would go. I read obviously what was in the report, but I don't know structurally exactly how that would look at this point. And so, but from what I've read in the report and what I've seen, like on org charts and stuff, I don't quite understand where that lives. For personnel, I would assume eventually human resources, but not quite sure with students, maybe building supervisors, but again, I hear folks saying the part about the power, and how you wouldn't wanna get cut from the team, or, you know, like there could be that concern of backlash, et cetera. And so I would just recommend whatever you all think based on what you read, et cetera, on what you think would be best for the district.
Personally, I mean, I guess I feel like although we may quibble with some of the details, I think the recommendation may be stronger if we stick to what's in the report, because they speak to the general principle, I think, of what we're talking about. Again, starting on the bottom of page 21, they have a subsection, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion.
It's then in their final recommendations for that section too on page 26 and 27.
Right, so I mean, to me, I feel like if we can,
27.
instead of sort of creating our own thing, if we can pass to the school committee like, hey, highlight this, you know, this recommendation, and then, I guess, you know, Erin, to speak to what you were talking about too, I'm thinking like, could it be, and I think they talk about something like this, like, for example, maybe this wouldn't work at all for many reasons that I don't know anything about, but like, you know, the human resources person, you know, that we just have, like, could that be a 20% of their job? And I know that's not ideal, ideally it's a full-time person, and like you said, Jen, we don't wanna just pass it off to somebody who doesn't really care about it, but as an example, like, at Brown, you know, when we have search committees, there's one person on that search committee who's assigned the role of like the DEI specialist and always has to have their mind on that, sort of plays that role in that position. And so I can imagine someone who's fairly high in the existing hierarchy, you know, you know, whatever you call it on the flow charts or whatever, and takes on this role as a piece of their job and then always has an eye toward that, that might make it an easier fit, sort of structurally.
I would argue that we should go for the pie in the sky and get the direct, like, put in for whatever the title, and it gives
Yeah,
more
makes sense,
validity
yeah.
to it versus it's just part of someone else's job. And, you know, even at the medical school, you know, we have, like, there's all the different, you know, we do have the and on the subcommittees or on when you're doing something, you'll task it out. But I think having, if, you know,
That would be
if we're
ideal, yeah.
going for like what our ideals are, I think, so that it's just
Yeah,
not
agreed.
part of someone else's, it really is so valid that we think someone should be dedicated to it full-time, or part-time.
I thought too, they posed some really good questions on page 22, cause it's not one size fits all, it's not like you put this one person into place and then magically, like, equity and diversity and inclusion happens. I did read very clearly, like, their rationale for why having a centralized person would be very helpful, especially with 9 different buildings and a variety of things to be worked on. But I think it's good that they pose some questions for either this subcommittee to look at, or the school committee and the administration, because you wanna make sure that, like, it's done well, and so, I think, as most of you know, like, I work at URI, and we do have a role, that is like this, and we've had it for 5 years, 6 years, like a bit, right? It was
More
time.
than that, yeah.
Yeah, so for a while, but you've gotta be really intentional about that design and making sure that they have the support systems to be able to do things, so you can't just put one person in place and then give them no budget. Or you can't put one person in place and not have specific goals outlined, because if not, like, you're kind of setting that person up for failure, and so making sure that, like, I like that they pose the questions about, like, where is this in the central office hierarchy, what would make sense? How would they be working with folks, you know, how would that work in the overall ecosystem of working with the building supervisors and different things, like, I think that's important at some point to really think through, because I think it is very important to have somebody focused on some of these initiatives, as there are so many things that could be done to make equity, you know, across the district, but like kind of really thinking that through too, I think is important. But I do think that, like I said, like with the timing, like you could say something now and it could be thoughtfully thought out and then put into place, but I don't know if you wanna lose a whole year with a request, so just something to consider. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, cause where my head goes is, it's one thing to hire, you gotta retain them too, right? And so, if that's gonna be created, what else is taking place to make shifts in the culture, to connect to values, so that it is a place where they wanna stay, where they feel empowered to do something, and that they aren't the only ones working on it. We're not gonna wait for them to get stuff done, especially if they might not be hired or whatever, so that's where my head goes, is retention.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is gonna be not a simple one, but at the same time, I feel like, at least personally, I feel like it's one that maybe we should try to prioritize and push forward to the school committee with the knowledge that it's not gonna be simple, it's gonna take time, you know.
Are you officially making it? Do you
So-
want the committee to vote on it?
Sure, a motion to recommend a diversity of equity and inclusion director.
I'll
For the
second.
schools.
Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay.
And then going back, I don't know if folks wanna circle back on it, I know when you, kind of how we got to that recommendation, I think, was the other recommendation about like being able to communicate when there are issues, so I really liked your example about the coaches and the schedules, right? And so you could do all this effort, get a bus, and then the coach says, oh, practice goes till 8 and the bus leaves at 7:20, like what is a student to do, kind of thing. And so like, is that a separate like thought that the committee has as far as like being able to report things, or is that something that waits until like you have somebody in place to catch those things, or can those things happen simultaneously, or like kind of like that? Cause that struck me in the report of like students knowing things weren't quite right, or having concerns but not being able to express it in a way that they thought it would be heard or listened to, in addition to teachers. And so that stood out to me, and so didn't wanna let that, like that kind of morphed into the conversation of, but then who would it go to, but just wanted to acknowledge that first statement too of like, you know, thinking about that, because to my knowledge, there is not an anonymous system of doing that. I think there's a couple different mechanisms in town that are a little different, but maybe other folks know better about what mechanisms are in the schools.
And I think also there's maybe another issue within that, which is communicating the policy, right? And it's more than just the policy, but like the culture, right? Cause a lot of coaches too are coming from outside. But it's not just about coaches, right? It's about people leading activities. And I don't know if at the school, it's like teachers know everything that's going on, or if it's sort of like some teachers who would be definitely on board with this just don't know, you know? And others who might be on the fence remain on the fence because nobody's saying, hey, this is the culture now. And if they were told that, they would be like, all right, well, I mean, I'm not gung-ho about it, but if that's, sure, yeah, I'll make sure I am by the time the late bus gets here. So it seems like communication and culture shift is one thing, and then a reporting mechanism is another thing, if those things are sort of intentionally, violated, what's wrong with it.
I think that was one of the things that I think stuck out in the report, was that there's no kind of like clear focus on equity and clear direction or clear communication down that equity is a priority, and then communicating that down from the top level. And that kind of goes to the culture, about, you know, hey, we have this late bus, we wanna make sure kids use it, make sure you know, like, you know what I mean? And kind of the way I would see it is equity becomes a priority in this district, and then it is incumbent upon the building leaders to embrace that and to spread that message, you know, and it's kind of the chicken or the egg, you know, but eventually, you know, I would think it gets to a point where it becomes common knowledge that, you know, we want the kids to use the late bus is there, and,
Well, and I know the report talked a lot about accountability.
Yeah.
So I think that's where.
And that's where I think having the person in the position who is spreading that message, and also I do think, you know, there was a lot of bias-based bullying discussed in here, and I do think it's important to have a mechanism for reporting that. And for those situations where, I tried to talk to my teacher and it didn't happen, or I tried to talk to my coach, or hey, the kid in math class continually is doing this to me.
I was just gonna mention that, we do at MKHS have an anonymous tip box in the library, for issues of like discrimination and stuff. It's not currently very widely used, although there are signs all around the school about it. But that might not be, like, I don't know, there might be better ways to do that, but we do have an anonymous tip box in the library right now that's available to all students. It's actually run by the REA. So, yeah.
What is it, what do you have to do if you wanna report it?
It's, a box that you can put a slip of paper into, and it's locked, so obviously only people with the key can open it, which would be a teacher, probably Ms. Wester.
Do you know how often it gets checked?
Every day.
What's REA, sorry?
The
Racial
Racial
Equity
Equity
Alliance.
Alliance.
Thank you, sorry.
Does it get utilized often?
Nope.
Is it private? Is it like if I went up there with all eyes can see me going in, or is it in a private place?
It's like tucked away, but it's in the library, so.
It's
you know.
accessible, but not on display, I mean, it's not like,
Right, like it's sort of in a corner and, it's inside of the library, so like people in the hallway aren't gonna see you, and it's in a part of the library that's not the main area, so, you know.
It can be discreet.
You can be
You
discreet,
can be
yeah.
discreet, but you know, it's not like you're invisible.
And this is just the high school, not middle, there's no
Yes,
system in the middle schools.
Well, that's,
I don't
yeah.
know about the middle school.
But again, like, it wouldn't go to anywhere official, like, it, it would come to
Right.
the REA, but it would just be like things that we might then talk about and work out, but nothing, like, no authority or
Right.
decision-making to make any changes, it would just be more for students to feel heard and supported with whatever their issues are.
But then obviously if it was something serious, we might go to the school.
And if it were something serious, I would,
Sounds like we're
take
talking
to
about,
administration, so.
sorry, recommending like a reporting mechanism for issues around diversity, equity, inclusion. So, I mean, it's pretty broad, but something along those
I
lines.
think we're.
And equity too, so the bus, like even that
Yeah.
work where there feels like there's a power, or
Yeah, yeah.
a different, because kids may not,
So-
the bus situation or something.
How do we phrase that,
The way the report phrased it, NKSD should offer an anonymous and accessible reporting system for students to report incidents of bias, discrimination, and identity-based bullying. NKSD should develop a plan for including anonymous reporting for race and gender-based harassment and incidents of bias with district-wide reporting systems.
again, I think the more we stick to the report, it's like,
Yeah.
well, we're the professionals, like, let's just say.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way they phrased it, and I would think bias would cover, those types of incidents,
But that's something too, when the AD talks and all the incoming athletes get the talk from the AD, that's like something so easy to have
To bring
be
up.
part of the talk.
Yeah.
Like, listen, getting in here is important, and we have this, and if that isn't happening, we have this mechanism.
Right.
We need to know.
Right.
And that can be part of, that.
yeah, and if
that
the coaches
AD
aren't
talk.
ending their practice on time,
Yeah.
or if, teachers aren't, ending ARC on time, or, whatever, like, we wanna know these things.
So, not to lose the thread of the reporting mechanism, which I think we should come back to in some official capacity, but the other thing that keeps coming back is what I think is their 1A under priority recommendations, which is creating an NKSD equity vision statement. So that's what we've talked about in the context of this discussion about the reporting mechanism, is like having a public equity vision statement that gets reiterated, that gets publicized, that in your example, Sherry, that the athletic director states, in addition to then following up with, and here's an example of that, we have this mechanism and blah, 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 but that vision statement is sort of front and center of everything.
I've seen that work too, like, I actually have an example from today at my work, is we have something like that, and, we were trying to make decisions about budgets, and we needed to cut something for an event budget. And somebody made a recommendation of cutting a shuttle that would help students around that are mobility impaired. And then somebody else like countered and said, no, like that doesn't align with our visions of how we make decisions, like let's cut something else. And so it can work really well, like when you were talking about culture and stuff, like to have people know, like, no, we make all decisions through this, and so when we are talking about X or Y, like we cut the like chocolate that we were gonna hand out at the fair versus the bus, even though like that seems clear, it helps people like be able to have the language of like when they're making decisions, so a vision statement can definitely be helpful, in like helping that culture part of like making decisions, or the other example you made about like when you're hiring folks, you know, whether or not you have a specific person with that DEI lens, or, you know, the person running a search says, hey, you know, everybody, this is the vision statement for the district, and, you know, as we're making decisions, let's think about that. You know, I think it can really help, and so, it definitely came through in the report that they recommended that it would help, especially with having so many different buildings and so many different leaders, kind of having that central thing might be effective.
So, yeah, I would make a motion to recommend creating an NKSD equity vision statement.
I think that's something that we can do here.
Oh,
And
cool.
then, once we develop it, push it out to them. What do you all think?
Yeah, I think that would be the charge of this committee too.
Yeah, I think that falls
Then
within our scope,
Great.
and then to have them approve it.
Perfect.
So like draft one and then.
Draft one and then.
And then propose the draft to the school
Yep.
committee for
Yeah.
adoption.
And then what about going back to the reporting thing?
The reporting thing, I think, is
Okay.
a push up the chain, but I think it makes more sense to have the DEI subcommittee like draft a
Yeah.
equity vision.
So is there still a reporting mechanism on the website, the anonymous like bullying? There used to be one, I don't know if
There
it's still
Say
there.
something.
is one, but it's not
And I don't know where that goes, that's the other thing.
really,
I've never heard of anything being reported and then followed up on.
Yeah, so on the main page, when you go to like NKSD, there's like a couple little things up at the top. One is the 2022 calendar, one is bullying information, and one is non-discrimination policies.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you click on the bullying one, it brings you to like a district bullying form, and then it has them like kind of delineated by school. And so if you click on it, you can fill it in, which is good. But let's see.
and this is really strictly just for bullying,
Yeah.
as it falls under the bully
So
policy.
they talk about it in the report on page 57 toward the bottom, on page, number 7, 57. Page 57,
They're
number
very
7.
soft. No, like, actually publication.
And you
report.
can't submit it.
Oh.
No, I just did it, sir, I just did it fine.
Oh,
For the
okay.
recording.
Sure.
Click on my,
That's
fine.
holy
That's fine.
moly, I'm like scrolling
Just like
through
off the
here.
top of your head.
Yeah, and you can't submit it anonymously, which is an issue.
Yeah, but it's good. I mean, like I always try to give like.
But
every-
when it's
yeah.
submitted, where does it go?
I do not know.
Was that what Brian talked about at a few
I
meetings,
thought so, and
right?
it
Like,
goes
it's a
somewhere else.
It's not here, it's whoever has the app.
No, that's the
Oh,
see something, say something, this
Oh,
is
okay.
different, yeah.
This,
Okay.
Yeah, and this is only for stuff that falls strictly within the state bullying policy under safe school, which is a very narrowly defined policy.
but you know,
So, yeah.
I mean,
some
it
of
is
that there's
something,
crossover.
yeah. But it's certainly, I don't think, what the intent of everything else is.
But so one thing is, you know, as far as what you all decide you wanna do as action, you could just recommend that in general, or you could recommend, you know, that and acknowledge this as well, you know, like as far as like, you know, that we know this, but like questions arose were, where do these firms go, how, you know, et cetera, why, you know, there's no, anonymous like mechanism, et cetera, and then that would allow, you know, the school committee either so there's a couple different ways that the school committee can work with the district. One is obviously with policy, obviously approving budget, et cetera, but then also like working with the administration to learn and understand things that come to us via the community. And so like some things fall into like the administrative lane and some things are like the school committee. And so depending on kind of what needs to be tweaked, et cetera, like the recommendations might look different coming out of the school committee. But at least like getting it to that level, then it can go from there. Cause it could be something as simple as updating and changing this form, all the way to, no, actually it's much, much more difficult and needs to be, you know, completely different things, so.
Yeah, but again, like where does that form go?
Yep, so that's like one question, right, that might be
That's
low
my
hanging fruit, right? It looks like it is definitely tied school by school, so, you know, you could make assumptions, which you should never need to make in something like this. And it does say on the form that you can do it completely anonymously, so maybe that's a choice, you can submit it.
I just tried to submit one without a name and it says the name is required.
Yeah, but you could type like not applicable maybe or
Oh, maybe.
something.
It's supposed to
But
be-
it sounds like there just needs, and so that's where I'm coming from, is like on that particular one, it's more maybe of an administrative thing, of just pointing out some things to the administration, and whoever's in charge of that area can make a couple things about who catches it, et cetera. Then to the equity audit recommendation, like it's either we need this form to be more things, or we need some separate process to, you know, maybe do things that are outside of the bullying policy, but that fall into a different policy, depending on kind of where you all decide are the priorities.
Do they need to be separate? Do we need to address each policy, or can there just be a global reporting mechanism? I hear you keep saying, you know, like, oh,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's to the bullying, like, I don't know if that's a rule that it
I
has to
think,
be.
I'm seeing it as two separate things, so I think there are certainly different policies, the bullying policy, harassment and discrimination policy, and those are different policies, but I think of the reporting mechanism, and I'm thinking in, you know, a student
Yeah.
mindset, and, you know, if I have to go searching for what, like,
Right.
what form am I filling out, and where is it going, and
Yes,
who's gonna
correct.
do anything about this? And if I have to go through 2 or 3 different forms, it's, you know, I'm 14 years old, I'm not gonna do that. So I think the forms and whatever should be broader, that there should be one reporting system, and whatever the student or whomever's reporting, whatever they have to say, they should be able to say it,
And then it gets figured out on the
And
back
then,
end
yes.
where it belongs.
It's
Right.
affected the
and then
powers
it goes
that
to
be.
somewhere, someone who can handle it appropriately, you know, whether it be, you know, someone in administration, I would hope some counseling or mental health professional is on board with that and could offer insight and, you know, support to the students and
Seems like that would be sort of easier too, to sort of build on the existing infrastructure rather than sort of like recreating the wheel for like.
right.
Yeah, I'm just checking, cause that specific thing comes out of, something from the General Assembly. So I was looking to see if they delineated like a specific bullying reporting you know, like if that is like something that they say, then, you know, the district wouldn't be able to tweak it, so I'm reading quickly on that, but.
Right.
That's where my brain went on, is why does this live on its own? Cause I agree, you wanna make things as easy as possible for students, cause there's so many competing priorities and so many things, especially if they're having a hard time in a specific area. But you also don't wanna break the law, so we can check, I'll read it while we're talking.
I mean, they should be able to pull what they need to comply with the state bullying law from whatever form is populated, because it's really narrow what the state defines as bullying for the bullying policy. Like there's stuff that gets reported on the bullying form that isn't actually bullying according to the bullying policy.
So what I would say is if you all want to recommend to the school committee that they look into this, or to, you know, or create one very specific or whatever, like that's where you could definitely do that, because, you know, obviously, you know, Jen and I will represent what you all want, but we're not gonna bring things up unless the committee, like, you know, like that's the purpose, like, we're here to help guide as far as what, like, how and what, but not, you know, we wanna make sure that we're representing what the subcommittee says, so.
I'm really sorry, I gotta head out, guys, I'm sorry to leave early.
Do you have any input on this particular one before you scoot?
Think so, not really, I agree with what's been said, so.
Okay.
And then whose was this? Yeah, sorry
You
to.
can keep it if you want.
Oh,
If you
really?
want, yeah.
Oh, okay.
You just have to put the
Thank you.
cover page, cause I wrote on it.
I really appreciate that. I'll read through it.
Perfect.
Good night, Chloe.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So thinking about the next steps, do we need to, is this too much to sort of send, like, is the school committee gonna be like, well, geez, yeah, we, you know, recommend everything that's in the report, or do we need to prioritize what we've said, I mean, I guess in general, I look at the report and I see, and to me, it's like, with a few exceptions, all these things would be great, but I'm not just gonna say like, hey, recommend the whole thing, send it all to the school committee and go for it, right? So the idea is like prioritizing and like, again, like we talked about in the beginning, like low hanging fruit. So what, what would you all think the committee's gonna look at and say, well, that's too, which is it? Like, I don't know.
It's not one. Like, that's my hope, number one.
Kind of following up with that, can you maybe explain what else might be within our scope? Cause I know, for example, like we've talked about the professional development piece here, which in my opinion is like, all of this is great, and what if a student wants to report something to a teacher that doesn't know what to do with that
Right.
information, or doesn't do the right thing with that information? So it's all important,
Yeah.
but like, yeah, what
I
can
was
we
actually
do? What
gonna bring that
do we
up
need
right
to-
now,
yeah.
but I think that making a recommendation regarding professional development, first I'll go back and circle back to Katie's original, the mandatory. That with certain aspects, I agree, it shouldn't be forced, but it should be offered, and right now, nothing is being offered. So I think that right there, just bringing it to the school committee and proposing that these, areas of professional development be offered to, faculty and staff in the district. And I think that, I don't think necessarily it needs to be any additional budgeting for, because I think professional development is part of the overall operating budget in the first place. I'm not sure, but, there are also a lot of, organizations out there that will come and do professional development at no cost. So I think those are things worth, looking into and being able to offer to, the people in the faculty and staff in town.
One thing I wanna clarify on the professional development, cause this was a conversation we discussed at great length with PCG. They felt very, very, very strongly that it should be mandatory for administrators. Based on what they discovered in their dealings with the district. That was something that they stressed. And they had good reason to suggest that. So I would be hesitant not to put that, to discount that recommendation.
Yeah, I just would not force teachers into it.
Yeah, teachers, I agree with you, but I think we need to make that distinction between administrators and teachers.
Yeah, I think if administrators are the ones that are gonna end up with this, like the reporting, for example, that, and decision-making, that it's important that they have the training, whatever we determine, or the school committee determines that specific training be, but certainly that needs to happen, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
So they said specifically just administrators.
Ideally,
Ideally mandatory, but
ideally,
not-
they feel it should be mandatory for all, but they said that they felt that, they understood with teachers, not making it mandatory, but they felt very strongly that it should be mandatory for administration in this district.
I mean, I think there are some professional development things that we have been mandated that we have to do. For example, we need Title IX training every year, we need, suicide awareness training every year, and they're mandatory. So I don't see a problem with some of it being mandatory when you're dealing, when you're in the classroom, right, with students, that should happen. But definitely on a broader scale, that administrators need to be trained in how to deal with these things and how to accept, like, any reporting and what to do with that.
Well, and I think to your point too, you don't know if you need to mandate things until you offer things, right? And so you could, you could start with like, hey, we have these things, and then you can see what happens, right? Cause you never know, like people might surprise you and be really engaged and excited to go learn more things. But if you're coming up to a challenge and it's like, oh gee, like we're offering these things and like the same 6 people are coming and like we're not making district-wide, culture-wide, vision-wide impact, okay, then we need to reassess like what we need to do. Cause I do think willing participants are really important, and I also think hearing and listening to folks about like the what is really important, like I know at my work, like I don't love trainings when I'm just like, oh, like why this, you know, and so I think however it is like administrated, like really like thinking through those conversations, to make sure that it's valuable. And then with the budget piece, you know, I was looking through the budget when you were talking, and so there's a couple different considerations for that. One, of course, is like bringing in folks, and there are a lot of free resources, but also thinking about when would this happen? And so that's another piece of it, because if you do professional development during the day, that's one thing, and there's a certain amount of days, but with the read to write this year, you know, we know that has been something that took up a lot of the time that was designated for that, and then if you're training folks beyond those hours, like that will have a fiscal cost, and so not only the facilitators you're bringing in, but if you are going after school hours on time, that et cetera, and this is an add-on, which you of course don't wanna take away from other PD that's important, you know, I think that is where a budget consideration might come into play. And not saying that it has to come out of district money, but like, you know, what could that look like? Are there grants available? Are there, you know, organizations that would come in? Could someone sponsor something? Could,
There be
ESSER
computer
money,
modules.
you know, like there's so many
That's the other thing
things.
we talked about, is making it available for those who
Yeah.
wanna take it
Yeah.
outside of school hours. We had a candidate come in, to the interviews for assistant superintendent, they're in a district where they have that available for all their teachers, who can take it when they want it, as they want it, like, and you had brought up what, you do also, like, so it doesn't have to be something where we sit 400 teachers down in a classroom. It could be for those who are willing, if they wanna do it at night, like, they could do it. So, you know, there are, I think, ways to provide it, outside of the typical PD and still get the information out there.
Would it make any sense for it to be like, there's not any one, training that's required, but there's sort of like, almost like electives, like you gotta fulfill like X many, I understand like if you push too hard, if you make it mandatory, then it becomes sort of a backlash, cause it's like, oh, this is, you know, what they're feeding us, you know, sort of propaganda type, you know, and you've got this backlash, but I guess it sounds like you know the research better than I do, but I feel like reaching people that are ambivalent to me is the important. There's gonna be the true believers, and there's gonna be the people that are never gonna accept it no matter what, but it's the majority, I would think, you know, in the bell curve are in the middle, and it's reaching those people, the people who are just like, whatever, but then they see it and they're like, oh, okay, actually, so like an example is, and I agree 100%, like the implicit taking the implicit association test is not the answer, but understanding what implicit bias is, I think is super important, and I think it's really enlightening for those folks who are in the middle, and sort of didn't really get it. It's like, oh yeah, I guess, yeah, you know, I never thought about it that way, but that sort of makes sense. I think that's super important, you know, but how do you reach them if it's not required, but also don't require it because there could be the backlash, you know?
Like a range of possible modules or something where, you know, disability, I mean, that came up in here quite a bit, disability, disparities.
Neurodivergence.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you know.
So would it make sense then to prioritize the professional development based on what this committee writes as its, like, mission statement or the vision statement of equity in the district?
I don't understand, I'm sorry.
So we talked about a statement being, right, a mission statement or vision
Yeah,
statement. So then would it make sense then to align the PD with what that vision statement is?
I got you. Yeah, I mean, the first step would be like the communication of what it is and what that means, for sure. That would definitely make sense. I think too, you know, it, like, if that's something that you all think is a priority, like, and again, you have to think about, like, there's priority in my mind now until end of school year, right? That's like the most urgent priority, and then there's next fiscal year priority, and then there's long-term priorities. And so I think what your point about, like, how do you prioritize, it is important, to give the school committee some direction, because there's lots of other subcommittees putting forward priorities, and there's lots of other things that are coming, and there's obviously only a certain amount of resources in the world and, et cetera, and a certain amount of time that can be dedicated to things. And so I do think if you have a priority ranking of your priorities, like, that probably would be useful for the full committee to see. And then also, if you feel like professional development, like, and again, it could be this spring, next fiscal year, and then long term, and those decisions all don't have to be made today, but like if you have some short term things, like I would be as specific as possible, because the less specific the recommendations, in my opinion, that come out of subcommittees are, the more time it will take, because the school committees only has every other meetings, like we're gonna be doing budget, we're gonna be doing teacher negotiations, we're gonna be doing building committee stuff, like there's a lot of other stuff, and so I would definitely say if you all have thoughts, like make sure to communicate that, cause if not, like the committee will have to have those conversations and it'll just kind of stall it if you will. But I do agree, like with the vision statement getting drafted here, I think that's a great example, but I'm not saying you have to come up with like a list of, this is the curriculum for PD, it's like, hey, this year it'd be great if one thing was offered, or if one thing was supported, and the next fiscal year, if we could look at what the budget is, like it could be something like that to give some framework, so then, if the committee says, hey, go back to the subcommittee and ask X, Y, Z, or what are their thoughts on this, or from the report, we need more information about whatever, then you can at least have that conversation, cause that groundwork and that foundation's there.
And it doesn't, I think, someone was talking about, like, you were saying, Erin, about how to get things rolling as we're waiting for someone, and it doesn't even need to be as formal, like, my division, I work in adolescent medicine at Hasbro, our division, we start every divisional meeting with someone will talk about, oh, this week, this single mom was sitting in the waiting room and da-da-da-da, or whatever. And we talk about it, how was that? And, one of my colleagues' husband's an environmental attorney, he does the same thing. They start, all their staff meetings will have some sort of DEI kind of, how this affected me at work, or, oh, today we were talking about this client and da-da-da-da. And it could be, and you're just talking about it, and people are hearing ideas, and so and it could be like 5 minutes is dedicated, and people, and you're just like, wow, they're encountering that, I wasn't thinking that as something, and just hearing it, it can be as subtle as that, as we're waiting, and doesn't cost, and it's just part of changing the culture, and hearing other people's thoughts, and kind of coming up with things, and people might not even realize that it's part of it.
That's great. We do
Yeah.
that at my job. It's
Yeah.
focused on safety, cause that's
Yeah.
the number one priority,
Yeah.
but every single meeting is talk about safety, cause
Yeah.
it's the priority, so
Right.
it's that same type of thing, what is your mission, what is your value?
But just to include it or start it,
So-
As to PD, and I know Erin, you and I talked, but the subcommittee brought forward one recommendation to the school committee and nothing's happened with it, so that's kind of another thing, with the safe zone training and the documents, like we've had 2 things come forward and nothing's been advanced with either of them.
So that was obviously before my time, for the safe zone one, did the school committee, vote on?
They did, they voted,
Yep.
they approved it, and administration was supposed to implement it, and they haven't.
Okay.
And,
I can look into that.
the other one was the documents, to update the district documents to be more, gender neutral and family friendly, and nothing's happened with that either, so,
and
Right.
part of Safe Zone, you have to have the mandatory education, everyone in so part of it will get built in from that,
and that was just to make it available for anybody who wanted to take it.
Yep. Yeah, I can definitely follow up on that.
So to me, personally, I would nominate sort of short-term things, and I know we talked about these as, late bus, right?
Yep.
To me, like, I feel like recommending, I don't know if we already made this motion, but the director.
We did late bus and the director.
Okay, perfect, and then I feel like as soon as we can, like, trying to come up with a mission statement,
Yep.
cause I think that's critical, that we can then forward to the committee for possible approval, hopeful approval.
So we can work on that at the next meeting, but I would say, feel free to work on, like, everybody can work on their own individual draft, and we can come together at the next meeting with our, our own workups on those, and then put
Yeah,
them together.
what that could look like too for you all is not that you have to sit and independently draft, but bring resources, right? Like, I think that that's another, part of being in education is there's lots of probably examples out there, there's probably lots of suggestions, lots of rationales, but what's gonna work in North Kingstown is, it's not always just like copy and paste either, you kinda gotta work through it and think about, you know, your current culture, your current district, et cetera. But you can at least bring words, so it could be like, hey, I really like this sentence from this one, or hey, this one is really reflects what they were talking about in the equity audit, like I recommend that. So it's not that you have to come with a full-fledged, I wrote a vision statement, here it is, but if you have time to do some research, that might help you all be able to write it and move it forward a little bit faster.
And I would just say, like, personally, I can understand some people disagreeing, but I feel like in a statement like that, again, I feel like it's important to try to reach people who are ambivalent, you know, that it's in plain language in such a way that people who are maybe sort of like in the middle, whatever that means, I think you have an idea of what I mean by that, aren't looking at it saying like, oh, it's those liberal, you know, like, no, it's like trying to just be plain language, reaching people who are reasonable and say like, oh, actually, no, that makes sense, like, I get it, you know? I think that's super important, because if it comes off as too far on one side, people are just gonna not pay attention, you know?
So I heard you say for recommendations that you would prioritize late bus as the first priority and then the director as the second priority. Is that, I just wanna be cognizant of time, the meeting goes till 7, right? And so you have 10 more minutes, so are those the only two that you are gonna send forward to the school committee for the meeting on the 27th? Cause again, you're gonna lose, like, you lose weeks, right, every time?
I'll make a motion to, I think we're gonna get information about the bully mechanism, the reporting.
System.
So maybe, make a motion to get, I think we needed more information, right, on where that went to, Erin? That bully, you know, we
Yeah.
weren't sure if it was the
Yeah, I
state
think-
policy.
Yeah, so that is, that's just like a, kinda similar to the, why isn't the safety zone thing happen, like that is just something we can check on, cause it's like, it's in the scope, but out of the scope.
Yeah.
I think what I would recommend, if you all wanted to do something in that area of either making a recommendation to see if this could be edited to be more inclusive of other types of things to do, and then also, the part about where does it go and those sort of things, like clarifying that, so if yes, then clarifying whatever, or if you want something completely separate, like whatever you all think is best, but it definitely seems like you had some consensus about there needs to be some sort of non-power dynamic way to say, hey, I tried this, but it didn't work, and I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble, but like, this is not working for me, so whatever that looks like for you all is probably what the recommendation would be.
Yeah, I would say yes, and I think too, whatever it should align with whatever the mission, vision statement is, like it should all tie through, have a look so that it all feels cohesive. So, I don't know if that's a motion or.
So we could use the language from the report and then say, this is what we want, if it can be worked into that current one.
Yeah, like the administration would figure out the
Yeah.
implementation if it was approved by the school committee like that, and they could either start there, or they could say, no way, that has to be like that for that, and we're gonna do something different, but what you all could communicate,
So could the
yeah.
recommendation then be, make a motion to recommend to the full school committee that a revised or ramped up inclusive anonymous reporting system be put in place?
Yeah, I think
That
consistent with
reflects,
what's on
yes.
page 57 at the
Yeah, I
bottom,
think-
right, like, which what you just said is consistent with that, but, you know, in case it's like, well, what are you talking about, it's like, you go to page, 57 at the, at the bottom, like, what's in the report there.
And does anybody wanna say like who that goes to, or?
Ideally, if we get that other position, right, it
That's
should
where
be in.
Yeah.
it should go, right?
It
Yeah.
should go to the.
Makes
No,
sense.
I think it goes to this reporting system goes to the principals of the individual schools, the way I'm reading it,
Is that where you, ideally, where would you want this form to go to?
to the person who is
Today,
responsible
let's say.
today, probably the principals who have been trained on what to do with it.
Since they haven't, is that where you want that to go?
Well, I mean, I think there isn't one that exists right now, so, like, you can't make, like, we don't know exactly what's happened or not happened when things have gotten communicated, and so, I think, you could say something like central administration if you wanna get out of buildings, if that's where the power concern is coming. I didn't see that specifically outlined in the audit, but, they definitely talked about, concern about, what's the word? Retaliation and different things like that, and so if that's a specific thing that they definitely did point out is like, you know, you're worried to tell your principal because then you're gonna be the kid that told the principal kind of thing, then maybe the recommendation should have that. If that's not a concern, you just wanted to go somewhere, you know, you were talking about PD, so you could tie in a different recommendation about PD, of making sure the people that are getting it at the building level know how to appropriately handle it. Like, there's a lot of different ways to stack it. But again, I would be specific if you have specifics. If you don't, that's okay, and then the school committee can review it, they can send questions back to the subcommittee, et cetera. It's just like, if you already know something, I would say it, or if you don't, that's okay too, and then we can kind of figure out where to go from there.
Cause it does seem like it's in that gray area between like, sort of like an idea or policy and implementation, you know, cause it's sort of the weeds of the implementation. You know, like that, like what you just said last, seems great to me, that like we make a motion for this reporting system, the school, you know, an ideal world school committee says, that sounds great, now you guys figure out, you know, like what would that really look like, you know, and then we come back with, because like, I don't think we can sit here in the next 5 minutes and figure out the details of what we don't, you know, what that would. But at the same time, it would be nice to make some sort of a motion to, in that regard, you know.
Yeah, and you have a motion on the table, I don't think you have a second for it yet, or a vote, but, you know, you did have one, so
Oh.
depending on, if somebody wants to amend it, or, you know, whatever, you could, or you could have a second on it and then vote on it, and then go from there,
So
kind of
the motion was to create an anonymous and accessible reporting system.
Right, as outlined in
Pursuits
page
as outlined.
57, yeah.
I would second that.
Okay.
All in favor?
Are there enough of us?
What's that?
Are there enough of us?
Yes, yeah. Yes, yeah. Okay, awesome. Does anybody else have anything that they wanna bring up before we end?
Did we land on the PD or?
We didn't, so we can discuss that at the next meeting.
The only recommendation that I would make, is the budget. If you think anything relating to PD for the next fiscal year is gonna have a fiscal impact, like, if you would wanna recommend it in this next school committee meeting, cause they're gonna start looking at the budget and seeing the budget in that next iteration. That's the only urgency on this document is.
When does the next what are the timeframes for the next fiscal year?
Yep, so it would start July 1
And go to
and then
next
go
year.
till June 30th.
Okay, so
As-
we're on right to read,
Yep,
so the whole next year is right to read.
yep. So, if you wanted to do any PD for anything that was addressed in the report, anything that ties to anything beyond that, like, it might have fiscal impact. Or like, you could, cause there's union contracts, cause there's, you know, different things like that, so just something to consider, like, you all can obviously make your own choices on what you wanna recommend, but that is the only urgency, like, in this piece of it, is that the administration's working really hard to form and is pretty far along in that process, and so, but it's gonna come to school committee, we will workshop it, et cetera, and there's a lot of different pieces going into it.
So I'm just looking at whether there's a concrete recommendation in the report. So there's a whole chapter on professional development, chapter 6.
Yeah, it was one of their priority recommendations. So Angela, if I hear you right, all the current PD days for the next school year are all allotted for right to read. And then if I heard you, Erin, if we said, okay, well, that's great, but we think that this is a priority and they need to have PD in these areas, it would cost, because we would have to pay the teachers for their time in order for them to take PD in these areas. So if we didn't allocate funds toward those, there would be no professional development in any of these areas until school year 2024-2025
From the budget.
from the budget.
Yeah.
Can we make a motion about, like, how specific do we have to be?
Do we
Like,
need a dollar amount
motion
to propose, or?
motion for budget money for 1 or 2 professional development opportunities beyond.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously I'm new to the school committee, but I think, you know, it doesn't have to be wildly specific, it could just say, you know, for the school committee to consider as they're looking at the budget, you know, the professional development line and whatnot. You know, it could be probably as vague as that, or if you have a different suggestion, you could do that, it could be probably any range of that. Because obviously Jen and I are hearing these conversations, but the rest of the school committee might be watching them, but might not be, you know, and so, you know, just making sure that your voice is accurately communicated, I think is what was really important to me, so whatever you all think in that area.
What about the language that's on page 18 under that priority recommendations? Prioritize equity-focused professional development. It's one of their priority recommendations. And then they have something a little bit more specific on page 33. But again, the priority recommendation they give is prioritize equity-focused professional development.
But it's that specificity question I'm stuck on, right? Like, if we say prioritize, well, what does that actually mean? Or if we say consider, are they gonna say, well, we thought about it for 2 seconds and we don't think it's a priority, so, but we did our job, cause we considered it, right? So is it the, you know, is it the point that if we have 0 now, can we say commit to, or without a dollar amount, to at least 1 professional development opportunity for this
Teachers and
academic?
teachers or
Right,
something.
something like that, is that?
Yeah, like allocate funds to support one professional development opportunity
At
or
minimum.
two.
Yeah, at least
minimum,
one,
like
yeah,
to
yeah.
support
Minimum.
the thing here, yeah, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, to support the equity audits.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do something like that. And again, like, it's just
So-
all the subcommittees are advisory, right? So you're advising the school committee to do X, right? What they do with it, how they decide to take that is up to them, but if that's what success would look like from the subcommittee, is that, you know, at least one thing happens next year to try to help professionally develop the administrators and the teachers in the areas that were pointed out in the equity audit, then I would probably put that forward if you all felt that way.
So what is it you just said, require?
Motion to say whatever I did.
Yeah. Require at least one
at minimum, or
training regarding cultural competence and culturally responsive practices.
financial
Is that the words that
support.
they used in the?
They use that on page 33, that's what I happen to be looking at.
I'll just pull it off the page, what page is it, Judy?
Well, we could,
So
could
well,
be
there's 2
broader to
different
say
places.
equity focused.
Yeah, so on
Right,
page
professional
18,
development,
they
yep.
say
Equity focused.
equity-focused professional development.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
require at least 1 professional development course
To be offered, not
to be offered in
forcing everybody into it.
equity-focused professional development.
Maybe required for administration,
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, and so.
Yeah, we're not saying we're
We're not
mandating,
that
yeah,
one.
I
Yeah.
gotcha. Okay, who made that motion? Melissa?
Sure.
Okay, can I get a second?
but
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Okay.
Robert's rules and the, you know, it's, yeah.
Anything else before we adjourn?
So you did, I just wanna make sure I'm clear, late bus, director,
Bullying,
the form, NOMS form,
yeah,
and then the PD.
and then the PD, so we did 4.
So 4.
I feel like that covered a lot of what y'all talked about.
And we'll do the statement and move it.
And then the vision statement draft can come later, cause that's not tied to, the fiscal part.
I wanna thank everybody for all their work on this, I really appreciate it.
Motion to adjourn.
Second, Angela's like, no, thank you, let's